Hey everybody, it's Kevin from Twin Talk, and today we're going to be talking all about Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. Stick around to the end of the episode to see how our drawing of Black Manta came out, and if you like what you see, subscribe to the channel for more content. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom is the sequel to Aquaman, which came out in 2018, so we're now getting the sequel 5 years later. We all know the story surrounding Amber Heard and her private life, the DCEU crashing and burning and reinventing itself, but despite that, I thought this was a pretty worthy successor to that first film. I really enjoyed that film. Thought it was very bold, overall very solid, humor, action, love, sci-fi elements, and that kind of carries over into this one. It's got a lot of the same flavor. Right away, we could tell that the tone was pretty much the same exact movie. So I really enjoyed that first opening sequence. It felt great to return to the lore of Aquaman and Atlantis, and they did a good job of kind of catching us up from that first movie too. Those quick little flashbacks, those recaps, further developing this story of Arthur Curry, Jason Momoa as Aquaman, growing as a character, as the king of Atlantis, kind of being torn between the land and the sea, of his duties as a father and learning to accept these responsibilities with the help of others. I thought the story was pretty competent overall. It touched on elements of global warming, with mankind polluting the environment and the consequences of that and us dealing with that. Touching on those real life elements but with comic book flair really worked for me. The realistic challenges of what it takes to be a king. I really liked seeing Aquaman kind of struggle a little bit because every character has to have like a need and a weakness. I wish he would take the role a little bit more serious as the king of Atlantis. That's kind of my good and bad about the movie, is that's what Aquaman is known for, is being the king of Atlantis. So he should carry that honor a little bit more respectfully, but I kind of dig the flavor that Jason Momoa gives here because it's just so him. Like, he's just this wild punk rock, larger than life kind of personality, and I like that energy that he brings to the character, because by the end of the film they kind of address that Orm was kind of stoic as the king, and he kind of addresses that Aquaman is actually a better king for it because he's not so rigid. He's willing to learn from others and accept humbly direction from others, even his enemies, and that's what really makes him the worthwhile king in the end. That's kind of like a personal gripe I have that actually worked itself out by the end of the movie. But more of the good, the attention to detail with the continuity. I was very surprised of how canon this movie was to that first film. It's a very strong sequel to that first movie. I think back to back, this is a pretty well-rounded pair of movies from DC, which is a shame because even from that title sequence, seeing Warner Brothers and all the DC characters and their property, it was kind of like a sigh of relief, the disappointment, but the relief of that, all right, we're starting over. I have hope. It is what it is. And it's a shame because I think this year, 2023, between The Flash, Blue Beetle, Aquaman, those were pretty solid movies. Shazam 2 I wasn't a huge fan of, but overall I think that DC was somewhat consistent in their quality of movies this year. But I am still very optimistic and very much on board with this whole revamp of the DC properties. But this movie, for what it is, I really enjoyed it. Once you get the fact that this is not an overly serious movie, this isn't supposed to be gritty and grounded, this is Aquaman. It leans heavily into that, it embraces it, and I really appreciate that because it almost has this super dynamic way about it and feels like Star Wars, and it feels like Indiana Jones, and it feels like what a comic book movie is supposed to be in certain things, but especially the suit designs, the vehicle designs, and the world building is so creative, so imaginative, so stunning. Every time we delved into another element of Atlantis, the deserter kingdom felt so practical. Those deserter creatures and those deserter people looked like stuntmen in costumes, and it really made it super believable to me. Those ship designs of the octopus twirling where they could spin underwater and they could even twirl around and fly above the water. It was so cool, which again, I would love an open world underwater video game of Atlantis, or even Six Flags. They got to invest some money into their theme park rides and just develop an entire section dedicated to Atlantis. Make it like the Sphere or the Dome that's in Vegas, where you're sitting in a bar and it's got this visual rooftop where you feel okay, there's sharks swimming above you. Almost like how Disney has the Star Wars properties, right? With Galaxy's Edge, where we can go to Oga's Cantina. I want to drink in that sunken citadel right now. If they invested in that, I would be there hands down. But with these creature designs, James Wan gets to play a little bit more with the horror aspects that he's known for. Even this Lost Kingdom, these villains, these creatures, these zombie Atlanteans we'll talk about later in the bad, but you could see how he's kind of having just fun with that, and I kind of appreciate that too, because that's an element of who he is as a director. I was actually pretty glad and surprised to see how much of a role Amber Heard had to play in this movie. We know she got a lot of screen time in the first movie, and we know that this wasn't the intention with the sequel, that this was supposed to be the brotherly love, brotherly hostility bond between King Orm and King Arthur. So I really liked that we got to squeeze a little bit more out of King Orm in this movie, which he was fantastic to see again. He is really, Patrick Wilson is such a great actor, honestly. And that brotherly bond was really a highlight of the movie, of them kind of learning from each other, of like not being so rigid and so uptight. Put your biasness aside, your prejudices, and learn to live a little bit. Don't take yourself too seriously. Whereas like King Orm is kind of teaching him, all right, you could be a little bit more serious and take a little bit more responsibility. You got people that are relying on you as the king of Atlantis. You're not supposed to be this careless with it. So I actually really liked that dynamic of the brothers. But yeah, Amber Heard, Mera is too cool of a character to just sideline. There was rumors that she was kind of cut out of a lot of the film with everything going on in her personal life. They didn't want to let that hurt the marketing and the profitability of this movie. I understand that. But I was appreciative of seeing how much she did have to do in this movie, of the family dynamics of working with the husband and wife, the queen and the king, the in-laws, between Nicole Kidman having a role too, and them kind of protecting their family and their civilization and their baby. Freaking Arthur Jr. was such a great addition to the movie that, yeah, you can't really have that impact that you want of this family dynamic without the mother of the child. So I was glad to see Amber Heard back in the role as Mera. The soundtrack was a lot of fun, a lot of rock and roll. Born to be Wild was a great time in the movie. The humor worked well enough for the most part, I think, in this movie. And just a real quick shout out to Martin Short as this like Jabba the Hutt sea monkey in the Sunken Citadel. I thought that was an awesome part of the movie, which is why I'm glad that they leaned into the absurdity of Aquaman and his lore. Yeah, just embrace it with the octopus friend Tobo, the fact that he's a musician and stuff underwater. He's like this awesome secret super spy that, yeah, he can get in and out of any place pretty much. But yeah, that was a lot of fun to see too. The seahorses, more of that. All the different ship designs with it kind of looking like creatures from the sea. All of that was just really impressive. That cannot be understated of how visually dynamic and stunning these movies are. But with all the praise out of the way, let's get into the negatives of the movie, or things that didn't really resonate with me too much. DC kind of has a problem with generic CGI climaxes and villains. This like overarching villain of Necreus, Atlan's brother, was all kind of cool in theory, but it just feels so oh my god, I can't say this word. But it just feels so uninteresting and kind of expendable. Kind of dampens the stakes a little bit for me. Maybe because it is CGI, I don't feel like the weight and the gravity of this villain. It doesn't really impact me at all. It kind of reminds me of like Shazam 2's villains, where it's just a CGI fest at the end, or Black Adam with the third act. This movie kind of suffers a little bit from that formula too, of the first two acts are pretty fun and enjoyable and entertaining, but then the third act becomes this CGI cartoon fest, and it's just kind of like take it or leave it. It was kind of a quick fight anyways, and it's fine enough, and I kind of see where they were trying to go with it, with this whole brother dichotomy of King Orm and King Arthur being two opposing sides. Is he going to choose his own temptations? Because it was kind of like a possessive entity, right? Necreus and this whole black trident, and they were at war, the Atlanteans, with this power, with the orichalcum. And so I could kind of see how they were like, oh, this brotherly feud was kind of like a mirrored reflection, and they kind of overcame that as brothers by the end, which, okay, serviceable enough. There was a couple of wonky shots here and there with the CGI, a couple of slow-mo shots that was like really jarring to see, and certain scenes that could have benefited from another take, which actually Black Manta, I forgot to mention him in the good, but oh my god, that suit design alone is a 10. He looked so damn good, so comic book accurate. Anytime he's shooting, the beams out of his eyes is just, you know, how could you not enjoy that? Having him with this black trident was kind of cool because he was able to like power up and go toe-to-toe with Aquaman. And it just felt so comic booky, all of it, the Manta Men. But his character was a little bit like one-dimensional, where he kind of just felt a little too cartoony at times. Maybe because he was like possessed by this entity, Necreus. He wasn't given much to do. I just felt like his ending fell a little flat, especially with the impact that we're supposed to get of, okay, Arthur now comes full circle, right? From the first movie, he reaches out his hand to help him, an enemy, and kind of do the right thing and be the bigger person. And Black Manta completely rejects it, understandably. He's been on this personal vendetta to avenge his father's death from Aquaman. So I understood that. It just felt like it could have breathed a little bit more. It was kind of like just brushed over after two movies. They were like, oh, take my hand. And he's like, no. And he just goes, this wonky shot of him falling. And they're like, all right, we got to get out of here. And it was just like so quickly brushed over that it didn't hit me as much as I feel like they were intending it to. So that was a little bit disappointing because Black Manta is so sick. And this like evil scientist, Dr. Shin, Randall Park, I wasn't a huge fan of in the first movie, even with the brief moments he had. I did not like what he was given to the role. I don't know, it's just something cringy about him. But I actually enjoyed his story arc of, like he was just wanting to see Atlantis with his own eyes, and he's just this scientist that's driven to learn more, to push the boundaries. He's kind of making these like mistakes along the way and getting in with the wrong people. So I actually kind of felt for him a little bit by the end, that I was like, all right, yeah, he kind of redeemed himself for me as a character, as an actor. My favorite scene has got to be that invasion of Atlantis with Black Manta in his ship with the Manta Men. All of that, again, just felt so science fiction, so comic booky, that I was like, just, oh God, I ate that up. A lot of great action scenes too. That end sequence with the tridents, it kind of felt like Star Wars with like the lightsabers a bit. I really liked how that was shot. That was really, really good directional choices. For every like great thing that James Wan does, he does like one bad thing. Like it's like, overall, I think he's a great director, and actually going forward into the DC with James Gunn taking over this whole entity, I kind of hope that he brings James Wan back on board for some sort of project, because he's a really great director. It's just disheartening because it's like how this movie ends with Atlantis showing themselves and revealing themselves to the world at large is a great story element that you could really dive into a bit more. And it's really intriguing to see the Atlanteans come up almost like Wakanda from the Marvel movies. And it's like, yeah, what would the response be to that? Not everyone's going to receive that well. Not everyone's going to trust them. Same thing with the Atlanteans. It's going to kind of be a little bit of a learning curve for these people to coexist, which again is a great theme. And I really wanted to see that dived into a little bit more. Of like, all right, what would this be as a trilogy? What would be the next thing for James Wan's Aquaman series and Arthur Curry, Jason Momoa, all these characters? Overall, I think despite a revamping of the franchise, personal drama happening with some of the stars of this movie, with reshoots and rewrites, I think this movie is pretty solid enough. I don't think it deserves the hate that it's been getting. I'm going to give this thing a 7.5 out of 10. I was leaning towards an 8 towards the first part of the movie, but then as the movie kind of went on, I was like, all right, I could see this kind of being a little bit lower in my book. What did you guys think of Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom? Let us know in the comments below. Anyways, that about wraps up today's episode of Twin Talk. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, comment below to join the discussion, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content. We'll see you next time. Peace!